Hello and welcome to Heritage Auctions. We are in the Dallas headquarters of the auction house, and I am here. My name is Christina Rees, by the way, and I am a marketing specialist here at Heritage. And I'm here with Aviva Lehmann. She is the Senior Vice President of American Art for Heritage. We're going to be talking today about what is coming up, which is our May 12th American Art Signature Auction, which you are shepherding in for us, and it's exciting. This is a big one. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about how we've evolved these signature American art auctions.
Well, first I have to say how excited I am to be doing this with you, Christina.
Okay,
this is our first one together.
That's right.
I'm a big fan of your writing, and so
you.
I'm very excited to be talking about American art with you specifically.
Thank you. Thank you.
But yes, this sale is I would say it's a beautiful and natural evolution of where we're going with American art at Heritage. It's no secret that we are a leader in the field, and it's no secret that we hold many auction records in the fields. But we wanted to take it further. My team and I wanted to say, okay, where do we go from here? How do we build on our successes? Mm-hmm. It seems natural, which we've discussed in the past, that we as an American auction house should really up the bar, up the ante, so to speak, in American art, and really let the marketplace, the country know more about American art. So the way I look at it is, Heritage is this massive monster machine of an amazing auction house that handles lots of material, right? We have, I think, 48 categories at this point. Mm-hmm. I think we handled over 800,000 objects last year, something like that. Many auctions, more than any other house. But with all of that, we decided to take our niche and slow it down and really focus on scholarship and education and let our audience know more about American art in the context of American history and Americana and American culture. Mm-hmm. So that's where we're going with this sale. And what we've done here is it's a much smaller sale. Mm-hmm. We've gone from, usually we do anywhere between 150 and 200 lots, but this auction, we pared it down drastically to, it's about a 70 lot sale.
Wow, right.
We've raised the minimum for the sale. We're sort of just expanding on what we do with American art, so to speak. So we are holding our signature important American art sales twice a year in the auction season, like we always have in May and November. Mm-hmm. But we are expanding. We want to give our client base, our collectors, opportunities to acquire really beautiful works all year round. So in addition to our monthly showcase auctions with property in sort of a modest price point, we are now also holding specialized American art sales, online only, with property roughly the $2,000 to $10,000 range. Mm-hmm. And that will go on in between our two major signature sales. Right. And the minimum for this auction coming up on May 12th is about $10,000, and it goes up into the high 6 or 7 figure range.
Right.
What we also did here is we have even renamed ourselves. We want people to understand that we're doing something bold and drastically different. Whereas a lot of our competitors are taking apart the American sales and moving masterworks into other categories where it makes sense. And we're all in the same boat. We're all trying to find new buyers, bring new life into the arena of American art. We are going in the opposite direction in taking pieces from other categories and building upon what we do within American art. Right. And we will be lecturing on it across the country. We will be bringing these masterworks to big American art towns like New York and Beverly Hills and Chicago on the national tour. And I will be there as well. That starts next week. But right now we're in our headquarters, in this beautiful studio.
Right.
And I'd like to talk to you a little bit about some of the highlights of the sale.
Well, we're going to start with Mr. Ernie Barnes because we have this painting right here behind us. So let's talk about Ernie Barnes and some of the other firsts that are taking place in this auction. But this is exciting.
Yeah.
So let's talk about him and what we've got.
Sure. So we've had pretty great success in the past few seasons with artists that are not traditionally in our wheelhouse, like Harlem Renaissance, magic realism, modernism, precisionism, regionalism, all of that. And so this Barnes came to us, it takes my breath away. It's sort of hard to even talk about it. I'm a little distracted by it when I talk to you.
Yeah.
But for anyone who's familiar with Barnes, everybody knows, he's a big name right now. He's considered the comeback kid. There was just an article in ArtNet about him, calling him the comeback kid. Mm-hmm. His marketplace is so dynamic right now, and it is so drastic in its evolution that we are seeing big prices. Up until 5 years ago, I think his auction record was a few $100,000. Christie sold Sugar Shack last year, 18 months ago, for $15 million.
Yes.
That, I mean, I have not seen a meteoric rise like that in any aspect of American art. Maybe Rockwell, maybe some Golden Age illustration, but nothing this fast.
So contextualize this for us, Sugar Shack, and this rise, who he is, why people are going so crazy for the work,
So-
how we already even know the work.
Right.
It's already in our bloodstream.
That's right. He is in all of our minds from childhood, because his imagery has been seen in Good Times, and he's been on the cover of, I think, a Marvin Gaye album.
That's right.
And he was himself a football player. So he was a notable figure in his own right before he devoted his life to painting.
That's
but
right.
He was a football player, but even what he was, this big, large, strapping man, this big, optimistic, happy man who always sort of seemed sure of who he was. So even in the locker room, when he was resting during the season, he would be drawing in the
Yeah,
locker room.
that's right.
He would be inspired by the musculature and the mannerist movements of the athletes. And his friends and his teammates used to make fun of him in a jovial sort of way. He didn't care. He left all of that. He moved away from all of that and focused a very large portion of his life on his body of work, on his painting. And he felt it was hugely important to portray in a very modern way the beauty of Black culture and the quiet moments that make his life and his family's life and his friends' life beautiful. He wanted to show that to the world. That's why, you know, his seminal show is called The Beauty of the Ghetto. And in fact, this work was included in his show, The Beauty of the Ghetto, that took place at the Grand Central Art Gallery in New York around 1990. That was his first big show in New York. So this is one of his few works that was part of that show.
Right. This one's called Quintet.
This is called Quintet.
From
and
1989.
That's right. And I love this picture for a number of reasons. So in most people's, in their mind's eye, they imagine Barnes doing these paintings. This is quite large for Barnes, so usually on a little bit of a smaller scale. Lots of figures, lots of dynamic movement, lots of narrative, but much more, you know, zoned out. It's, you see a much broader scene. This work, although it's large and powerful, it literally holds a wall. It's 5 feet across in this amazing handmade frame that he made. These fence frames that he made as sort of an homage to his father, actually.
That's right.
That's pretty cool. You don't see his frames a lot. But this, although it's large and powerful and has all of that, it's very intimate. You know, you're right up close on, you're in that scene, you're in the quintet.
That's right.
With these figures, and they have all these, you know, I always look at Barnes as sort of taking the tradition of mannerists like El Greco.
Right, I see that.
Or Thomas Hart Benton.
Yes.
Elongated figures, very dramatic, his own brand of modernism that's very unique. And you have that here. I mean, look at the elongated shapes of the musical instruments, of their fingers.
The fingers, that's the mannerism.
Right? I mean, their facial expressions, their eyes are closed. They're almost in this euphoric moment where nothing else matters other than this beautiful scene where they're making music together.
Not just the elongated figures, but all the gold.
All the gold, that's
Yeah.
right. There's a warmth to it. It feels hopeful, it feels positive, it feels loving. And that's what people love about Barnes. You know, many artists, part of the Harlem Renaissance, and in fact, even another artist we have in this sale, Charles White, who's just like, you know, one of the greatest masters, one of the greatest draftsmen in our country's history.
That's right, that's right.
And Barnes revered him. So it's sort of fun that they play together in the sale, you know, in a catalog together. And we'll talk about the Charles White later. But what you see, as opposed to that draftsmanship that you see from Charles White, where he shows sort of the strife and the challenges of Black culture in America, Barnes didn't want to focus on that. Barnes really wanted to focus on the positivity.
Right.
And in our world, I really do believe that collecting tastes go very much hand in hand in what's going on in the world.
Right.
So I think that's why Golden Age illustration is doing so well right now, and we'll talk about that as well. I mean, Golden Age illustration, very much like Barnes, these artists want to capture nostalgia and something pure and something good.
Right.
And we are in a dark time in our nation's history and in the world's history. You know, we all came out of this pandemic and our country is very divided, lots of ways, lots of reasons.
People are gravitating toward cozy, intimate,
Absolutely.
warm, loving,
Yes.
charming scenes.
Yes, yes.
That's right.
So
and
this-
American art actually can scratch that itch pretty well.
better
A
than
lot of
any
it.
other
That's
category,
right.
right? I mean, even when you look at Norman Rockwell, he did this great, his barbershop painting that is one of his best known works. It's just a scene in the back of a barbershop after hours, a little window in the back where you've got these older men, some veterans, small town people just playing music. I mean, that's what unifies us. It goes back even to Native American time, right? I mean, dance and music is a part of our celebration of life.
Right.
And that's what I want this sale to represent. I want it to be a celebration of the positive aspects of life in our country.
Right. Well, at the same time, we're talking about sort of timely things. So this is we were talking about this yesterday, you and I. This is a sale of firsts. There's some firsts here for us.
Yes.
Some
yes.
firsts here for maybe some of the artists in terms of fresh to market or what have you. But
That's
let's
right.
talk about Charles White.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that drawing is so special. It grips me. I mean, I worked on that essay this Sunday. I had so many other things to do. I just got lost in that drawing. And I think a lot of people will. It's a very special, important work, powerful. You know, Charles White was the master of portrayals, usually a single figure,
Usually.
sometimes a mother and child, always in muted tones, sepia, blacks and white, pencil often, right? And so he could really capture detail. You know, a lot of the artists in this sale really focus on detail. Well, you can see that behind us. Charles White is one of those artists that his interpretations, if you get up close to this Charles White, you can see every pencil stroke. I mean, the draftsmanship of this work alone, aside from the importance in the art historical context and the history of the work, on its own, just as a drawing, it's superb. But Charles White depicts John Brown in this. It's one of two drawings that he mentioned ever doing of a white man. But it's important to his body of work, it's important to his message, in that, you know, John Brown, for those who are not familiar with who he was an abolitionist. He was famous for really he was a white man trying to abolish slavery. I mean, he was part of the raid on Harper's Ferry. It didn't go well for him. He was a martyr. He was captured and he was executed. It was a really dark time in our country's history, but he went on to inspire generations and generations. I mean, he laid the bricks towards the abolition of slavery, and that resonated with Charles White. So the drawing was executed in 1959, and that year is important because it marked 100 years since the assassination of John Brown, which happened in 1859. I think that was intentional. Charles White was close with members of the civil rights movement. In fact, he created this drawing and gifted it to Martin Luther King's legal advisor and speechwriter. So it belonged to a person. It was created by someone who was involved with the civil rights movement. It was owned by a pivotal figure in the civil rights movement.
Yeah.
It went down, subsequently it was owned by a Dr. Littlejohn, who was another person that was key in the civil rights movement. So its history, its lineage, its provenance, where it lived, it's sort of, I feel that we all are stewards for the art that we own. All of us, even you and I, right?
That's right. That's right.
And so I believe, and this is what I tell my students, that provenance is so important for good and bad reason, but when a work is owned by such important, notable figures in our country's history, that energy travels with the work wherever it goes.
Right.
You feel that when you're looking at this Charles
Yes, it
White.
doubles or triples the sort
That's
of
right.
dimensionality of
That's
the
right.
work itself.
That's right. And other artists have depicted John Brown. He's an important figure in our nation's history. Thomas Hovenden depicted him. John Stewart Curry depicted him. But everyone did it in a very different way, a different narrative. Charles White chose to focus on just straight head-on bust portrait. He almost looks like an apostle. You know?
It's really beautiful, by the way. And if you see it in person, this is one of these things we talk about. It's a cliche to say you have to see it in person, but with
You
Charles
do.
White, my gosh. Yeah,
Yes.
absolutely.
And that's why we're doing this tour and bringing these masterworks to all of these towns because, yes, our online platform is unmatched. And so many people these days make purchases and fall in love with really great works of art. They'll spend $15 million on a picture sometimes that they've never seen. But I do believe it's really important to educate and bring the work to our client bidders. And that's why we are taking all of these on this very aggressive schedule, very
Yes.
packed schedule over the
Yes.
next few weeks. My family's not going to see me for the next few weeks. That's okay, because these are my children and I'm bringing them. I have to take care of them and make sure that they find their right homes.
If you go to the auction's website, on our website, you will see these preview dates, these times in Chicago, New York, Los Angeles, so you can go see these works. The highlights from
Yes,
from
and
the
we also
highlights.
have all of this information is in essay form in our catalog and online as well.
That's also
so I
online.
urge everybody. I mean, our platform is the greatest teaching tool we can have, and I want people to learn from
And
it.
we do use it.
Yeah,
yes. Yeah.
absolutely.
Well, let's talk about Huey Lee Smith.
Yeah, Huey Lee Smith, another really fabulous artist, an African-American painter who is such a wonderful surrealist painter. You know, he's been compared to De Chirico, and he's that good. You know, why don't our artists, our American artists, sell for as much as these artists? They should. I think American art is still so wholly undervalued in terms of what you can buy as a true masterwork. Compared
It's changing as we speak, somewhat. It's
Yeah.
shifting. So when you've seen this in your industry, in this
Sure.
industry over
Absolutely.
the last, especially probably over the last, can I say this, maybe 3 years? Does that sound about right?
I think
Do I
you're
have
right.
the time scale right?
No, I think you're absolutely right. There's a lot of big names, certain artists. I mean, Georgia O'Keeffe obviously is one of the most celebrated 20th century painters, and her record for Jimson Reed is $44 million. She's one of the most expensive 20th century American painters, period.
Period, yeah.
You know, we're seeing prices for certain artists like Edward Hopper got to $90 million in the past few years. Oh my God, Thomas Hart Benton. Andrew Wyeth just hit, I think, $17 million.
Yeah.
This is happening very fast.
Yeah.
Milton Avery, all of our artists, they are, the world is finally taking notice of what American artists have been doing. And you know, even you're seeing it in the institutional world. A lot of these American painters are getting their shows finally. Alice Neal, obviously, you know, and Cecily Brown is getting a big show right now. The Edward Hopper show at the Whitney, I went to see it last month. It took me 3 hours to get in.
Wow.
I mean, it was
That's a
such a
good sign.
moment. It was such
Yeah.
a, I walked in there. I mean, this is years and years where I remember years ago, there was a great Child Haslam show at the Met around 2005 maybe, and the galleries were empty. I'm like, why are more people not interested in this great American impressionist? It's really changing, and we're doing it hand in hand with scholars, with curators, with educators, with the auction houses, with the galleries. We're doing it together. We're teaming up. You know, our little, it's very collegial what's happening here. And I love it. There's a great synergy between all of our fields. We're coming together to really elevate the brand of American art. And Heritage Auctions is a very big part of that.
So let's continue to talk about some of what's behind us. What about this one right here?
This one stops my heart. I mean, I'm a little dramatic. I say this about every painting I
know,
sell,
but
but this is Henry Kerner,
Yes.
a rather obscure but hugely important magic realist. So
Right.
magic realism, we have a few examples of these very small little group of artists that were working right after World War II. A lot of them were inspired by, you know, the world situation following the war, and we'll talk about that a little bit, especially Kerner, whose family, he was a Holocaust survivor. We'll talk about that. Henry Kerner was from Vienna. He moved to America around 1938, 1939, left his whole family. The war happened, he went back and to discover that his entire family was wiped out by the Holocaust. He was alone. He came back to New York. He felt really, broken, and needed to express himself artistically and take his amazing skill and create a narrative of what he thought humanity looked like at that moment. So this work, The Showboat, is from 1948. It is a seminal work. It's if not the best work that he ever created. Magic realism is all about creating this unbelievable surface. I mean, these works, the Tooker behind me, the Kerner, the detail, the time, the painstaking attention to detail to create these works could take months, if not a year, to paint. I mean, Tooker might only do 2 paintings a year. You see that. I mean, these were labors of love. And artists like Kerner and Tooker were focused on creating very highly detailed compositions that fill the entire composition in almost a comical, almost like when you think of Bruegel in a way.
Right.
They're very much like the American Bruegel, and that they do these, or Hieronymus Bosch, very similar, of this sort of destructive, weird, sinister, magical, strange, not quite sure what's going on here, where you really need to stop and take this picture in. It could take hours to fully understand what's going on in this painting, but this was Kerner's ship of fools, so to speak. This was his Ship of Fools. He painted this in Brooklyn, right near Coney Island, so he was clearly inspired by Coney Islands, much like Reginald Marsh and Ben Shahn and other artists of that period that were focused on, again, Coney Island is so classic America, classic New York. There's no other place in the world like Coney Island. So it's very, real thoroughly American subject, but it's weird and it's wild and you don't quite understand what's going on. But this was his homage to the destruction of his family, this feeling of being lost, this feeling of this world feeling crazy, almost like a circus, and not knowing his place in it. He felt when he went back to Europe, he felt like he wasn't accepted because he was an American, and when he was here, he felt he wasn't accepted because he was an immigrant, and he was a survivor, a Jewish survivor of the Holocaust. Where did he fit into that? He was not part of the establishment, even though luminaries of modern art fully understood what he was doing. I mean, people like Dorothy Miller and the Whitney fully embraced Henry Kerner.
I was going to ask, yeah.
This work itself, again, look in our catalog and on our site, the exhibition history is as long as what you might find on a Picasso. Museums have been aware of this importance for decades, and our collectors are finally catching on. And Henry Kerner's son, Dr. Joseph Kerner, is an art historian and a professor at Harvard University, and he wrote a letter about this work, talking about it as his father's greatest achievement.
Oh.
So this is a really big deal.
Yeah,
both as, from the academic perspective, but also from a very personal perspective from the family.
Yeah.
I love that.
So, Tooker?
I love Tooker. Now, Tooker is another one of those artists where, a lot of artists in our field have a very strong synergy and creative marriage between other artists in our country from other realms. Like, we talk about Ernie Barnes having a close relationship to music. Rockwell has a very close relationship to Steven Spielberg and George Lucas, for instance. They often would base film stills in their cinematography on Rockwell. Tooker is also hugely influential on artists. If you see Guillermo del Toro, who is such a visionary, an artist, I mean, he is an artist.
Yeah.
He has based, I've discussed this with him, he has based a lot of his cinematography and his creatures and his creations that you see in Pan's Labyrinth and The Shape of Water on Tooker.
Is that right?
Yeah. Yes.
How about that?
Don't you love that?
Yeah, I do love that.
I do love that
I love
too.
those kinds of references.
I do too.
Period. Yeah.
I do too. But Tooker went further than that. I mean, even in his own lifetime, he was very close with artists like Paul Cadmus and Jared French. That was the crew. And they created these surreal, also very inspired by old masters, but more Renaissance, Van Eyck, that egg tempera, that whole moment. They studied the old masters, came back and tried to work in this age-old medium of egg tempera, this painstaking medium of egg tempera that could drive someone insane.
Yes.
So this work probably took him 5 months to a year to complete.
Right.
And this is a really important work in that it was painted in 1951. It's one of his first pictures where he really grapples with the subject of this dreamlike trance, this timeless dreamlike trance of these sort of androgynous figures. What's going on? Is it happy? Is it sad? It's certainly spiritual. It's certainly meditative. There's something going on here. Again, you have to really immerse. This is not fast food art, what we're selling here right now.
That's
this
right.
is really deep, heart and body, immersive art. And so Tooker, who was also close, by the way, with Lincoln Kirstein, and he was part of a show that Lincoln Kirstein created, the great, American modern dancer, visionary. Lincoln Kirstein put together a show in 1950, a year before this was created, and Tooker was part of that show. So was Paul Cadmus. I mean, there was this amazing synergy. I mean, even artists like George Platt Lyons, the photographer, it's so cool. I mean, George Platt Lyons once photographed Paul Cadmus and gifted it to Lincoln Kirstein. I mean, there's like there was this amazing synergy, almost what Warhol was doing with the Factory, but on a very different scale, much smaller. I mean, these guys they knew who they are, they led with their sexuality. This is a group of gay men who never felt that they needed to hide who they were and what they were doing, and the museum world took notice of it. I mean, these were artists that, again, were largely shunned by a larger establishment, but people like, the Whitney and the Met and larger institutions across the country really noticed right away. They
Right.
knew something was
They
big
knew
was
what
going
they were
on
looking
here.
at. Yeah,
yeah. So
absolutely.
this was this sort of think tank moment for American art. It's interesting how they all sort of speak together because they were all in this think tank together, whether they knew it or not. So this Cadmus also was, Tooker was an homage to his father who died a year earlier. Most of these artists were hugely inspired. We'll talk about, even the Huey Lee Smith. There's a beautiful little woman in green depicted in the Huey Lee Smith in this sort of strange, surreal, rocky landscape that's hard to understand with these beautiful flags flowing. You don't really quite understand what's going on, but the woman is believed to be his ex-wife, who he divorced a year earlier. So again, everything, all of us are the product of our life story, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
So, they use their life stories to create these painfully beautiful works.
Yes. Well, since we're still on the wall, let's round it out with Alt.
Oh, I love George Alt is one of my favorites. I mean, he was an artist who was a precisionist with artists like Charles Sheeler, Ralston Crawford. They were artists that worked mainly in New York City. And when people think of precisionists, they think of these amazing, almost simplified, geometric, flattened patterns of New York.
Generally man-made things.
Man-made
the machine
things,
age,
exactly.
Yeah.
That's exactly right.
Right.
Rooftops, water towers, bridges, trains,
buildings,
exactly.
skyscrapers.
Exactly.
Yes.
So Sheeler, of course, Alt did that, but he moved away from that. He felt very stifled in New York City. He actually referred to it as an inferno.
This is a beautiful painting, by the way.
I know,
So
I
just
know.
the fact that he tackled this is wonderful and interesting and different for him, I assume.
Absolutely. It shows a lot about what was going on in his head. I mean, he was a pretty tortured soul. He struggled with mental illness. He actually fled New York City after shunning the recommendation to seek psychiatric care. He needed help. And he didn't want it in New York. And he fled to New York with his wife, to Woodstock. He needed to I understand that feeling as a New Yorker. Sometimes you just have to get out of the inferno. And Woodstock is in the heart of the Catskills. It's in the middle of the Catskills. And it was a place that was hugely inspiring to a number of artists. George Bellows, who's also in the cell.
Who we're about to talk about.
That's right. I mean, Woodstock was, again, this amazing artist colony of creativity where New York artists left the city to explore the natural world of America. The Catskills are so unique. No place else in the world looks like the Catskills. And it's so close to New York City.
Right.
So, but Alt never was part of that artist colony. He was a loner. He struggled and lived in isolation with his wife most of the time. But he took his skill, this precisionist, clearly this is a man who cared about precisionist interpretations. I mean, the way he depicts this landscape is flattened, it's geometric.
Very crisp.
Very crisp. Again, every detail, every brush you see. But this work, he used to walk in the woods and look for inspiration.
It's graphic is what it is.
It's very graphic, it's very flat, it almost feels, in a way, almost Japanese in its flattened
You know what's
forms.
interesting about that, though, is that when the weather is that, which is what he's depicting, the world does look that way.
Sure, it does.
It
with
throws
those
things into
mountains.
high contrast.
Absolutely.
And things get very graphic.
Yeah, I mean, and the color, the white, it's so pure. It feels so hopeful and so calm. It feels like what peace should look like in your mind. So he actually wrote about this work. It was painted in 1940. He died not much later. He died tragically young at 57. He drowned. And he wrote about this work, and we record an excerpt of it that his wife recorded in one of her books about her husband.
Nice.
So I urge you to read it. It's
Yeah.
beautiful. I mean, he wrote about this picture in his journal that the vision, the image came to him in a dream. Again, it's our subconscious. We're all looking for peace, right? So this idea came to him in a dream. So the depiction of this, that's where it came from in his mind's eye. And then one day when he looked out his window, he saw these two guys, these two hunters in the landscape. And that's it, he got it.
Yeah.
And he captured this moment that a lot of artists, you see people like Rockwell Kent do it as well, this feeling of small figures in this large and looming and beautiful and uninterrupted landscape. And it talks about where are we in the scheme of things? Where do we fit into the natural world? How do we industrialize and still balance the natural world like this, which is really all about, American art, manifest destiny. It all comes from this in different ways, right?
Yes, it does, yes.
So it all relates. I mean, that's why our category is so broad, 1850s to 1950s, but there is a common theme to a lot of these artists. There is a tradition going on here.
Yes.
And that's actually his studio right there with the smoke coming out in the middle ground. So this is a deeply personal work for him, and to me, one of his greatest works. I mean, this was exhibited at the Met in his lifetime, right around the time it was painted. So again, the museums, the visionaries understood the importance of these works, and the collector client base in the world are finally catching up.
Yeah.
I mean, this is, again, the estimate on the alt is $200,000 to $300,000. Now, yes, of course, that's a lot of money. We're jaded in the art world, but it's not $50 million, right?
Right.
So you really can get a masterwork, an important museum quality, art book relevant picture for $200,000 to $300,000.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah. Well, so here's who I want to talk about, because you just mentioned it, George Bellows. He's one of my favorites.
Could you die?
Oh my gosh.
I know. And he also died tragically young in his 40s. I always wonder what could have been. He died in Woodstock.
Yeah.
He died of a ruptured appendix.
Right.
So, I mean, again, he was also, just like Ernie Barnes, it's all coming together.
So we have one of his works in this. It's called Introducing the Champion. Gosh.
Oh my God.
Wow. Yeah.
Talk about stopping your heart.
Yeah.
I mean, George Bellows he's best known for his boxing scenes, like Stag at Sharkey's. I mean, he did these boxing scenes. He caught the vigor and the primal energy of men like nobody else. I mean, and that's a tradition of art history for hundreds, if not thousands of years.
Thousands of years.
Right?
Yes.
I mean, I included a quote from John Wilberding, the wonderful scholar in American art, about the history and the tradition of depicting athleticism in art. And we have a few in this cell. It's sort of cool. I mean, we have everything from Leroy Neiman sporting scenes to George Bellows to another Ernie Barnes.
Scrum, right,
fantastic.
yeah.
I mean, and the Bellows. So let's talk about the Bellows for a second. So Bellows was an Ashcan painter. He was a gritty realist. He was an athlete himself. He was a minor league baseball player from the Midwest, from Ohio, Columbus. He moved to New York to study. He lived at the New York Athletic Club and would go at night and watch these underground boxing scenes, sort of like a fight club, and would draw. He started as an illustrator, like many of these artists. A lot of these artists began as illustrators. It's great. I mean, there's such a commonality between all of them in how they evolved. And again, it all comes back to illustration too.
Right.
So it's sort of cool that way. But so George Bellows was an illustrator up until around 1907, 1908, 1909. Our Bellows is from 1912, and it's one of his fantastic large-scale drawings, but it's more than just a drawing. There's collage elements. I mean, it's a mixed media work. It almost feels like a sculpture in a way, a flat sculpture in a way.
It has that much presence.
Yes. I mean, it is so active. The picture feels like a tussle. When you look at it, you feel the tussle.
You can
hear
hear it
like
and smell it, yeah.
Yeah, like you feel that, you smell the powder they put on their hand, and you see it. So it's this scene where you're right immersed in it. You're in the audience, and the scene up on the boxing ring is the champion, and the ref is holding up his hand in this great dynamic. Bellows was interested in not only the cacophony and the energy of the chaos of all of that, but humanity, but he was very meticulous and intentional, even in that chaos, of drawing diagonals and making all of his forms and relate. Everything's very intentional. There's an intentional madness to this work.
Yeah.
So all of these figures, every face, every arm is unique in that sort of classic Bellows way. I mean, Bellows does faces like nobody else. I just love his faces. I mean, and he based a print on that Bellows. He was an amazing printmaker, much like Winslow Homer, and they're much like Rembrandt. I mean, these guys were masters in so many media. Again, I don't know why those don't sell for more, but that's a talk for another day, the prints. Right. But this Bellows is, the estimate is $300,000 to $500,000. We feel really proud to have it.
I saw that price and I was like...
I mean, it's the best and most important Bellows we've ever handled at Heritage.
It's really nice.
And his other works on paper, boxing works on paper, have sold for 7 figures. So when you look at it that way, again, our estimates all of our estimates are there to help people understand their importance, but these are not price tags, you know?
Well, that's what I mean when I said when I look at the price, I was like, this needs to be an expensive
I want
work.
people to pay attention.
Yes.
I want people to understand from these estimates that these are really important works, but we always have to strike that balance where we get the estimate enticing enough to encourage competitive bidding. That's the beauty of the auction process, right? So that's where we stand with a lot of these works. You know, they're really wonderful examples of sort of every genre: Western, illustration, Impressionism, 19th century, all the way up.
Well, let's go back to illustration just for a second, because we do have some dedicated illustration. Not a whole lot, but we do have some dedicated illustration in this sale. We've got Leyendeckers in this sale. We have Sindock in the sale. You were going to tell me a little bit about Elizabeth Shippen Green.
Yes.
So let's talk about her for just a second.
Elizabeth Shippen Green is like the unsung hero of the golden age of illustration. Her work is very rare. So as we all know, you know, the golden age, the illustrators, was really a man's world. It was a good old boys club. But there were a few women in this group of them. There was Jessie Wilcox Smith, who's more of a household name, obviously not on the level of Rockwell in terms of people knowing her, you know, in every home in America, but in the art world, everybody understands her importance. I mean, she illustrated Goldilocks, and her illustrations can fetch $500,000, sometimes more privately. Elizabeth Shippen Green was part of this group with Jessie Wilcox Smith. And I think there was a name, I think they called themselves the Rose Sisters. My mind is blanking right now, but they created this beautiful little group of 3 women where this group of women that worked on illustration. And so this work we have is quite rare. She has a cult following. She had a beautiful way of drawing that is similar to Jessie Wilcox Smith. They clearly were influenced by each other, but very different. But she was such a wonderful draftsperson, and had an ability to capture this children and childhood and sweet maternal subjects in a way sort of only a woman can. You see that with her work. And so people who collect Elizabeth Shippen Green are people who collect women in the arts, people who collect illustration art, and people who collect just really beautiful, people who collect even, you know, someone who likes Mary Cassatt would love our Elizabeth Shippen Green.
Right, they like a certain kind of picture, is basically what you're saying, which can be found in painting or in
Yeah, so we're
illustration.
really excited. I mean, the estimate's $30,000 to $50,000. I would love to own it. I'll sell a kidney.
That's the problem of working for an auction
It
house.
sure is. I want to take everything home.
So some American greats, Winslow Homer and Thomas Moran, are in this sale.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, I mean,
yes,
what's
yes,
an American art sale without these cats?
Absolutely. I mean,
Yeah.
Thomas Moran, what we have here is, people know Thomas Moran, of course, for his depictions of the West. You know, there were a number of artists like Thomas Moran, like even Robert Henry, who were tasked with going out west, painting depictions to encourage travel, to encourage people to move out west.
Is that why?
Yeah,
Were they commissioned to do so?
Sure. I
Yeah.
mean, some of them were.
Yeah.
We have Thomas Moran, of course, the one we have in the sale is just so beautiful. It's a depiction from 1889 of Long Island. It's a Long Island landscape, and it sort of encapsulates all that is good in Thomas Moran. You know, he has a way of painting, again, light and shadow and the lushness of the American landscape. You know, again, the Long Island landscape is so beautiful. Reminds me a little bit of a Barbizon painting you might find, you know? So this work it's large, it's impressive, it's got really built up details in the foreground, middle ground, and background. You know, there's a footbridge, there's 2 little figures in the lower right corner. There's so much to see in this work. And again, it's this depiction of the untouched American landscape.
Right.
And Moran felt very highly of this work. He actually based 2 important prints on this painting. That says a lot about an artist and how they feel about their work. You know, how they sign
Wanting
it.
to keep revisiting a work is a little unusual for artists, and so when they do, yes, take note. Often they're ready to move on to the next thing.
Right,
Just
right.
like a songwriter.
So this is just one of the finest examples of Moran's Long Island landscapes to ever come to market.
Okay.
But speaking of Western landscapes,
Yeah,
I
let's
have
do
to
it.
tell you about this Arthur Wesley Dow.
I knew we were coming to this.
This Arthur Wesley Dow sends you to another planet when
Yeah.
you're in front of it. You know, Dow, again, is not a household name, but he is one of the most important figures. And I say this, it's a big statement, but he is one of the most important figures in the in the scene of American art, especially American modernism, which is funny to say because this is a 1912 depiction of the Grand Canyon, right? So you say, how is this a modern work? But here's the thing about Arthur Wesley Dow. Obviously, this picture is enormous. I think it's 78 inches across. It's massive. Mm-hmm. It's a depiction of this aerial view of the Grand Canyon, and it encapsulates everything that is spiritual and mystical and untouched and beautiful in the Grand Canyon. You know, you've got these peaks and this haziness because you're so high up looking at it, and this vastness and this spirituality that you feel when you're in the Grand Canyon, right? So you feel all of that. But Arthur Wesley Dow was from Ipswich, Massachusetts. He was a man, he was actually George O'Keeffe's teacher.
Right.
You know, we can thank Arthur Wesley Dow for Georgia O'Keeffe just as much as we can thank Georgia O'Keeffe and Alfred Stieglitz for Georgia O'Keeffe.
Right.
You know, he was that important because Dow was all about capturing in paint this almost Japanese sense of spirituality and calmness in the world, and internal calmness, and this trying to resolve the outer world peace with your inner world peace. This very Zen, immersive experience when you look at one of his canvases. And he focused primarily on landscapes, the untouched landscape in and around Massachusetts. Much smaller scale. You know,
right.
He tried to do, most of his works are this little. I mean, I've already spoken to very important curators in the country who've stood up and taken note of this Dow, and they say, this picture belongs in a museum because everybody understands the importance of Dow. Every museum should have a Dow, but to see a Dow like this on this scale, I mean, he did these only about 17 works, depictions of the Grand Canyon. This is his largest and his most successful.
The vibe at Heritage when we knew this was coming was, I could feel it even just through internal communication. It was like,
yes.
This is an exciting thing for us.
Yes, and you know, I use this term a lot. Everyone makes fun of me, but you cannot help but have a visceral reaction when you're in front of this Dow.
Right.
I mean, don't you feel it?
Yeah. So,
what do you feel when you see it?
I think about the smaller ones, and
Yeah.
the big one, I think this is his visceral reaction to the vastness of what he was looking at.
That's right. That's it. I mean,
Which is what happens when you move west. For anyone, especially probably East Coast, and I'm from Texas, so I don't, but I've lived in New York, and I've lived in London, and I've lived in places, and there's a call of the wild, you know, to get out there,
Yeah.
and then everything starts to become more expansive. Even just driving into West Texas,
That's
for
right.
me, just expands
That's right.
every cell in my body. That's what I see when I see that painting.
I feel that painting every time I look at it.
Right.
You know, if I'm having a stressful moment, I'll just pick up a picture. I'll look at it on the computer even, you know, because
Right.
it takes me somewhere.
Right.
And that
The molecules spread out. you know?
Yeah.
That's what I guess.
the
what I'm
molecules
saying.
spread out. The molecules spread out with a lot of the works in this sale.
Right.
That's why it's so exciting.
Well, this is an incredible sale, and we're very excited about it. We've talked about a lot of the highlights. Again, I want to stress that you can come and see this work, the highlights in these different cities, and use our website for this information. And anything else that we want to share before, and we also really hope that you join us for the sale. You can join us online on the 12th.
Yes,
So,
yes. And
right?
I will be traveling with the art. I will be giving talks. I will be giving gallery talks in our Beverly Hills gallery.
Is this by appointment? How does this work?
So no, I mean, if anybody's interested, the more the merrier. I love, you can't shut me up talking about American art, right? I'll find anybody. I'll sit on a soapbox on 42nd Street and just talk about American art. But yes, because I feel this heavy responsibility, like you do. You know, you're an amazing writer and you're an amazing art critic in your own right. And what you do inspires people to take notice of the art that you describe, right? And so this is what I'll say. About 10 years ago, I was at a symposium on American art, and Barbara Haskell, the director of the Whitney Museum, was on the panel, and I revere her. I think she's amazing. And this was right after she did her show on Oscar Blumner, who's one of my personal favorite artists. He was a Stieglitz Circle member with O'Keeffe, and you know, yada, yada. So she spoke, and someone said to her, what is your plan for the future of American art? And she said, my plan is more of a fear, you know, because what I see is all graduate students, you know, the art world is moving more and more towards contemporary art. Most people in graduate studies now are they're doing their PhD dissertations and they're focusing on contemporary art.
That's right.
Everybody's jumping on the contemporary art bandwagon. It's fabulous, but there's so much great art outside of that arena that has a story that needs to be told, and people need to learn about it. So Her comment was, my job is to find the next generation of people interested in American art, and that's how I feel. I'm part of that group with scholars across the country that are trying to elevate the brand of American art and educate younger people. Alice Walton is doing an amazing job of this with Crystal Bridges, and lots of our great American institutions, the Art Institute of Chicago, we're all doing it. But the way I see it now is that it's clear to me that a place like Heritage has a very heavy responsibility to join forces with these museums and with these greats like Barbara Haskell and educate. And that's why I'm going on the road and speaking about American art. So come, talk to me. I'll tell you all about anything you want to know.
Come and join us and feel this momentum.
Feel the magic.
Feel this momentum and this movement and this
That's
evolution that's happening with American artwork.
That's right.
Well, Aviva, thank you so much
It's my
for
pleasure.
talking to us about this, this upcoming event at
Thank you.
Heritage. And thank you for being with us today.
Thank you.